Thank you for tuning into the Pastor Finkley podcast. This podcast is designed to bring spiritual enrichment and enlightenment and instruction to the life of the believer. Pastor Finkley, with his revelatory teaching and insightful insight into the Word of God, takes us deeper into the richness that is found in God's Word. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the Pastor Finkley podcast. Without further delay, let's join Pastor Finkley for this insightful teaching. God bless you, family. This is Pastor A.D. Finkley, and welcome to the Pastor Finkley podcast. It's been a while, but I'm so glad to be back on the air with you yet again, sharing another dynamic podcast. And so, my friends, I pray that life has been a tremendous blessing to you. Listen, we are slowly but surely moving through this year of 2023. And it is my prayer that the favor of the Lord is resting upon your life. Hey, listen, friends, we got an awesome podcast today. We're going to be discussing, is this the end? That's what we're going to be talking about. And I'm telling you, this is a question, believe it or not, that is in the mind and in the hearts of a whole lot of people. Whether it's being expressed or not is still yet in the mind. And listen, I believe this, that the way that we can find the answer to this particular question, we've got to go back to the Word of God, and we've got to look closely to see what thus saith the Lord. And I believe that we can find all of the answers that certainly we're looking for to this question, is this the end? And so this is going to be an amazing podcast. We only have 30 minutes to kind of work through this. And perhaps, hey, if we're not able to exhaust our little perspective on this particular question, then certainly we'll do part two and we'll jump back in it. But with the time that we have, let's go ahead and let's just observe and take a close look at this question. Is this the end? Now, the first thing that I'll have to come out and say is, Pastor Finkley, why would you even pose a question such as that? And not only why would you pose a question like that, on the other end, I would say to Pastor Finkley, that's myself, I would say, Pastor, what makes you think that this particular question is on the mind of a lot of people? Is this the end? Well, I'm glad that I was able to ask myself that question, because it gives me opportunity to be able to explain. The reason in which I would say that is because when we take a look around, I'm talking about take a good look at the world, and we see so much that is happening. I mean, every time we turn around, it's something different. All you have to do is take a close look at the headlines that we see today. And we could realize that that things doesn't look too good. I mean, really, I know the Lord is good and He's keeping His people, but I'm speaking in terms from just the perspective of the way that things look. Well, when you think about our failing economy, our economy here in America is in trouble. Inflation is high. Food is high. Gas is high. Energy is high. I mean, everything is going up to an astronomical amount at this particular time. And interest rates are up. You know, they're constantly raising the interest rates up on everything in which we borrow. So, you know, car payments, credit card payments are up. The cost of living is up, period, just across the board. When you think about the war that's in Ukraine, when you think about the fact that we are here in 2023 still dealing with the remnants of COVID. You know, COVID is still a real threat, regardless of how we feel. I know it's been around here for the past 2 or 3 years, and, you know, we're kind of tired of it now, so we kind of moved on in our mind. But COVID is still a real thing. When you think about the fact that there have been balloons from China flying over America, you know, gathering the information is what we're told is taking place. When you think about those kind of things, when you think about the tension between China and Taiwan, because, you know, there's a real threat there. There's a possibility that China may invade Taiwan. I mean, really, when you think about these kind of things, when you think about how the U.S. just here last night, the day that I'm shooting this podcast, last night, the U.S. retaliated against Syria for a drone attack that killed an American contractor. I mean, that's an act of war. When you think about, the trials that are taking place with a former president, I'm speaking in terms of President Trump, all of these things are taking place during the same time. And listen, when you have that many things that are affecting that many areas of life, the question rises in the mind of a lot of people, are we approaching the end? Are we approaching the end of civilization and society within America? Sometimes, people don't necessarily verbalize those things, but those things they'll be thinking, those are some of the things they'll be thinking on the inside of themselves, saying, is this the end? Is this a sign? Is this a sign that the Bible is really coming true? Because, scripturally, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, scripturally, a lot of these things have been kind of foretold. A lot of these things have been kind of laid out. A lot of these things are self-fulfilling prophecies that you can find right in the scriptures. And since that is the case, we've heard for a long time, wars and rumors of wars, and we'll talk about that here in just a minute. But here it is. A lot of these things are self-fulfilling prophecies. And when you have those types of things that are self-fulfilling prophecies begin to take place, the question comes into mind, is this the end? Is this the way that it's going to end? Is how things are going to come to a close? And listen, quite frankly, I think that we really need to have this particular conversation, because I'm going to say this. Now, this is a Christian program. I am a pastor, a senior pastor of a church that me and my wife founded in 2006 called Global Restoration Center. And so what I'm getting ready to say. Listen, the fact that these things are transpiring, I believe that these are indicators that if you have not made your peace with Jesus, then now is certainly time to do it. I'm not saying that the end is yet, but I'm going to say that, listen, now is the time for you to make your peace with Jesus. That's right. I believe that it's time for you to accept him as your Lord and Savior. It's been past time, but when we look around and we see these things, and the reason I say that is because we can see the sign of the time, And we can say what we want to say. Quite frankly, we all are of our own personal opinion, and, we are all of our own personal ideologies and ideals. But at the end of the day, you don't have to necessarily be a stark, hardcore, born-again believer to be able to step back and look and see, wait a minute, there is something strange and there is something peculiar about the times. That's right, about this time, about the season in which we live. I mean, all you got to do, look at the level of murders that's taking place. I mean, in every city, it's everywhere. It's not just in Chicago or New York. In the small town, I'm not even going to say this is a small town. This is a well-populated town. We have several colleges here. But even within this smaller size city in which I'm in tonight, even in this smaller size city in which I'm living in, there is a high murder rate. There's a high murder rate here. And the more populated the cities are, the more capital murder that is being taken, that is actually taking place. And so when you look at these things, you don't have to be a hardcore Christian to step back and say, wait a minute, there is something going on in these times, in the times in which we're living in. I looked at a report here a few days ago, and a 6-year-old kid shot his teacher. I mean, literally brought a pistol to school and shot his teacher in the hand with it. I mean, there's no way that you could hear these kind of things, sit back and witness these kind of things, get the report on these kind of things, and not say to yourself, there is something going on with the times. And listen, if we were honest with ourselves, we would have to say that there's something going on with the times. The question that comes to our mind that we certainly would have to have an answer to is this the end? Are we getting close to the end of time, or time as we know it? Time as we regard it. Are we at the end of that? Are we going to wake up one morning and it's going to be lights out all over the world? Are we going to wake up one morning and find ourselves in World War IV or III, V or VI? I mean, are we going to wake up and our country is going to be at war with everybody? You know, we got things going on with Russia. We got things going on with China. Now we got things going on with Syria. I mean, are we going to wake up one morning and be at war with the entire world? These are the things that will bring us to the place where we would have that question within our heart. Is this the end? Is it the end? And I'm telling you, a lot of people have this question. Just because, you know, me or you may not have this question. And quite frankly, I think that for the most part, that many of us do have that question. But just because you may not have that question, that doesn't mean that that question is not something that is resonating in the hearts of people all over the world. Is this the end? Is this the end? Is this the way that life is going to be from here on out? Is it always going to be politically hostile? Is it always going to be our cities filled with ravishing murder? Is it always going to be that our children are going to school and really not being taught what needs to be taught in order to be productive citizens in society today? Is it always going to be that we're not going to be able to afford good food? You know, we could really get into that, but I'm not going to get into that tonight. Is it always going to be this way? Is the question that is in the mind of a whole lot of people. Are things going to always be this way, or are they going to progress to get worse? And here we go right back to our question. Is this the end? Is this the end of things? I mean, I think that is a really honest question. And thank God that we are able to answer that question on this particular podcast. And this is one of the reasons why, you know, I felt led to do a podcast such as this, because people have this question in mind. Are we getting close to what we could consider to be the end? Now, what I'm telling you, listen, friends, I've just given you several reasons why people would have this in their mind. But let's go a step further. There are some who are saying, I don't want to have any kids because I don't want to bring them in a world like this. I mean, really, you'll be surprised at how many younger people are saying, listen, I don't want to have any kids. I don't want to bring any children in the world the way that the world is. I don't want to raise children in this kind of climate. Is this the end? Is this the end? Because you do know that as humans, we must be fruitful and multiply, and we must replenish the earth. And if the mindset comes, I don't want to bring children, begins to run rapid in the minds and the hearts of a whole lot of younger people, then we're going to have population problems at some point in time. I mean, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not in the next 50 or 60 years, but at some point it's going to catch up with us. Is this the end? This is the question in which is in the hearts and in the minds of so many people. But the beautiful thing about the scriptures, and I'll say this, the beautiful thing about Jesus is that Jesus dealt with this question. Because even so many years, I mean, thousands of years ago, at least 2,000 years ago, Jesus was probed while he was walking the earth with the same question. When is the end? What is the sign of the end? Listen, we're not the first generation to ask this question. Is this the end? What does the end look like? When is the end going to come into place? And thank God for Jesus that he was willing to answer that question in regards of, is it the end?
Hey friends, Have you heard? Global Restoration Center has released its very first church app. So go ahead and head over to the Google Play Store for Android users or the Apple Store for Apple users and download the Global Church app.
Well, God bless you, friends. Welcome back to the Pastor Finkley podcast. We're going a step further because we're still talking about, is this the end? And listen, before we had a short commercial break there, we began to talk about the simple fact that this is something that Jesus dealt with, the whole concept of, is this the end? And so here it is. You know, we could find the answer to this question, this very serious question that, believe it or not, you're going to work with people who have this question in the back of their mind. Like I said just a minute ago, not everybody vocalizes the questions in which they have. You got to understand that these news reporting agencies, these news stations is what we call them. You know, you can get news 24/7. It is nonstop. You got to think about that. And the kind of emotions that these reporting agencies are designed to prompt in people, it's designed to keep you in a state of fear and a state of anxiety at all times. And some people are overtaken by it. You know, you get reports on YouTube, you can get reports on Facebook, you can get reports on Twitter. I mean, there's so many news outlets. All of them are on your phone. They're easily accessible. Anytime anything happens, it's spread all over the world. And I'm telling you, it has a lot of people, believe it or not, in this state of mind of heightened fear and anxiety about, is this world really coming to an end? Well, I'm glad that we're having this discussion because, quite frankly, Jesus dealt with this. And if we look at it from the perspective of what he said, there's one question that we can answer. There's one answer that we can give in regards to this particular question. Is this the end? We could stand flat-foot and say no. I know. As bad as it is, I know, as bad as it seems, as challenging as it is, and many of these things are signs. These are signs. But is this the end? No. That doesn't mean we throw caution to the wind. That doesn't mean that we say, oh, well, these things have to be. Oh, well, these things, this is nothing to worry about. I'm not saying that. I'm just going to answer the question. Is this the end? Well, according to Jesus Christ, who prophesied what would take place as we got closer to the end, I'm going to say this: no. And so don't allow what you see on the news. I mean, take these things serious, to an extent, just so you can be aware of what is taking place and what is going on around you. But listen, I'm not going to tell you to live in a state of anxiety and fear because of what is taking place around the world at this time. Because here it is. Let me answer this question for you. Jesus declares that the end is not yet. And so is this the end? No, it's absolutely not the end. And since it's absolutely not the end, we can enjoy life. That doesn't mean that you don't pay attention to where you are and what you're doing, where you're going, but we can enjoy life. We don't have to put ourselves in a position and in a state where we're so fearful that we can't enjoy life, because you only have one life to live. Now, that doesn't mean live loose, but what it does mean is enjoy the time that you have. Life is short, friends. Let me tell you, as a young kid, I never realized how short life was and is. But the older I get, the more I realize life is short. And since life is short, the best thing that me and you could do is try to enjoy as much of it as we possibly can. That's right. Enjoy as much of it as we possibly can. That doesn't mean that we got to, live wild and out of control. That doesn't mean that you enjoying life because you living wild and out of control. That's really not enjoying life. But that's a conversation for another time. but love on those that love you. Show that you care to those that care about you. Live life and enjoy it. Preferably enjoy it in the Lord, but live life and enjoy it because you only got one life to live. And know the end is not yet. And so the reason in which we could say this is because this question was asked of Jesus in Matthew 24. The disciples asked Jesus this question and said, Jesus, what shall the sign of thy coming? What shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? In other words, what is going to look like when you come back? And what is going to be the sign when the world is coming to an end? When it's really coming to a close? Jesus says several things in Matthew 24 in regards to this. But here are a few things that I believe that Jesus says that we certainly could resonate with in Matthew 24 that will set the stage for us to understand that what we see today when we look at a former president on the verge of being criminally indicted, when we think about that we are taking shots or shooting missiles into Syria, when we look at the war between Russia and Ukraine, when we think about the tension between our relationship with America and China, or China and Taiwan, when we think about those kind of things, I think that Jesus says a few things that would identify with the time in which we're living, but we still could say it's not the end. Jesus says this. He says in Matthew 24 at verse number 6, and this is not a Bible study, but we're talking about something here. You know, the end time is what we're talking about. And so this is not necessarily a Bible study, but we've got to discuss this. And we're going to really get to the bottom of this from a biblical perspective so that we can have some hope in moving forward and not have to live in fear and be afraid of the time that we're in. Then certainly we've got to take a biblical look. This is self-prophesied. Jesus said this. One of the things that Jesus said concerning this time in which we're in, he said that there'll be wars and rumors of wars, is what he said. Can you see it? There'll be wars. He says there'll be wars and rumors of wars. In other words, there'll be wars and you will hear about wars. And certainly, what are we hearing now as we look around? Oh, we're hearing wars and rumors of wars. That is exactly what we're hearing. We're hearing about all of these different types of wars and war in Ukraine. And here we are on the verge of going to war with Syria. All of these things are taking place on our watch. On our watch. That's right, on our watch. He said, not only will there be wars and rumors of wars, but he says, listen, see that you're not alarmed. This is Jesus talking. Now, this is way before Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. I'm talking, listen, this is over 2,000 years ago. Jesus said that the sign of my coming and the end of the world, he said that there are going to be wars and rumors of wars. You're going to hear about war all over the place. These are signs, friend. And as we look today, you know what we hear about? All of these different types of wars that are taking place. But you know what Jesus says to the believer? He says, see that you're not afraid. These things must take place. But you know what? The end is not yet. In other words, it doesn't matter how much war you're hearing. It's not the end. I know it may feel like it's going to be the end because this stuff is, always in our face. It is always coming at us. Every time we turn around, we're hearing about something taking place, especially on the front of war. There are acts of war that are being done daily. But Jesus says that when you hear wars and rumors of wars, see that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. And let me tell you something else that Jesus said. He says, for nation will rise against nation. Is that not today? Are nation not against nation? I mean, quite frankly, in America, we got to think, who in the world are our allies? They're so far and few between now. We got to think about who are our allies. And listen, whoever our allies is, are our allies as strong of a power as America is? Because if not, then now, we might be their ally, but they're not too much allies of ours. That's a conversation for another time. We're not talking politics on here. We're talking Bible on the Pastor Finkley podcast, okay? We may be dealing with some some current issues, but we're going to deal with them. We're going to be dealing with them from a biblical perspective. How about that? And so he says, listen, nation shall rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines. Oh my God. Listen, let me tell you something. Whether you believe it or not, there is a food shortage. Okay. There's not an abundance of food. We have food, but there is not an abundance of food. There is a little slight famine, whether we want to believe it or not. I mean, all you got to do is take a trip to the grocery store. There is a slight famine. It's the whole supply and demand thing. We got a lot of demand, but very little supply. And we've had this issue as a result of COVID and so many other things. It costs more to make products. It costs more to buy the fuel to run tractors. And man, this weather, we could really get into something about this weather, the way it fluctuates. It goes up and down. I mean, it's hot, it's cold, it's tornadoes, it's earthquakes. All of these things affect the food chain, whether you want to believe it or not. Some people don't even think that far to think about this, but that affects the food chain. And so he says, listen, nation will be against nation. We know this is true. You can check that off. He said there will be famines. You can check that off. And earthquakes. Listen, we just recently had earthquakes. We had an earthquake down in Miami. They just had an earthquake in India, I think it was. I mean, earthquakes everywhere, all over the place. All of these things will happen. But this is not the end. And so he says there'll be famines. There'll be earthquakes in various places. All of these things will take place. Listen, he said there will be pestilence. You know what pestilence is? Pestilence represents there'll be all type of diseases that are floating around. All different types of things that are taking place that quite frankly are to a certain extent unexplainable. Hello, how about COVID? I know we don't like to talk about that. We like to talk about China and it originating. I'm not into whether it originated there or not. It was a pestilence. Where did it come from? Who created it? What happened with it? Maybe some people smarter than me can give you answers to those questions because I'm just a Southern gospel preacher. I can't give you the deep details on something of that nature. But what I can say is that Jesus said there would be pestilence. There'll be some things that come on that, listen, we don't know how in the world they got here. We don't know what in the world it is. We don't even know how to treat it. We don't know what it is. Listen, we have no clue. He said these things would take place. That's what he said. But you know what? He says the end is not yet. This is not the end. This is not the end. And so I'm going to say this to someone. I know that we're kind of going over here, but I want to say this to someone that, listen, don't be afraid of the times will end because this is the beginning of sorrows is what he says. Yep. In other words, sadly enough, it's going to get worse. But he says these are the beginning of sorrows. That's right. These are the beginning of sorrows. And so here it is. The question that is on the heart and in the minds of so many is this the end? And you know what I'd have to tell you? Absolutely not. There's no friend. This is not the end. So don't be afraid of tomorrow. I said, don't be afraid of tomorrow. Don't be afraid of next week. Don't be afraid of what is to come because here it is. It is not the end. It's a lot of things. Yes. It is a lot of things. But one thing it is not, and that is it's not the end. It's not the end. And so I know some people are, troubled in heart, especially when they see these things. There's some people in this world that are saying, oh, if I was to leave here, how are my children going to live? How are my grandchildren going to live? Seeing what is taking place in the world. And I know that perhaps this is not you, but trust me, there are people who are troubled by these signs that they see in the earth. But here I come with good news. And the good news that I come with is that the end is not yet. He does tell us what is going to be the sign of the end. And the sign of the end is simply this. He said, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all of the world for a witness unto all nations. Then shall the end come.